crack train left New Orleans on the way to New York. About 40 miles into the trip, the train came to a sudden stop. There was a man on the track waving his hands, and the train stopped. He got on, and the conductor said, "Sir, what are you doing?" He said, "I got some coons that I'm selling, and I'm trying to see if anybody on the train wants to buy one." The conductor said, "Coon, man, if you don't," and one of the passengers said, hold on, be interested. Pastor said, "How many do you have?" He said, "Well, I ain't caught them yet. I'm just taking orders." I'm not sure that this is a sermon yet. It may be more just an order for a sermon. I had prepared for months a great sermon on Mark 5. And then I had an experience last Sunday morning that altered the face of worship for me. Took me to a place where I saw God in a new light. Last Sunday morning, Emily Hashaway, who did our announcements, was on to do praise dance. As she was doing her liturgical dance, the music stopped. And Emily did for us a sermon in life that we all ought to pay attention. She didn't stop. She didn't look at AV. She didn't look at the sound people. She kept dancing. She teaches us that you've got to learn how to keep dancing even when the music stops. She wasn't responsible for the music. Her job was to dance. And one of the lessons you've got to learn in life is that God requires that we be committed to our calling even in challenging circumstances. We are not given the option of quitting because life is hard, because times are tough, because we're broke, because folk don't like us. You've got to learn in life to keep on dancing even when the music stops, because the reality is if you live long enough, some bad stuff is going to happen. And you can decide whether you'll go up in a corner and complain about who messed up your time on the stage. You can decide if you're going to be mad, or you can understand that my job is to keep on dancing even when the music stops. When one reads the Bible in 1 Samuel 16 chapter, an interesting thing happens because David is anointed king. As a matter of fact, it's a celebration. His daddy had left him out of the number, but the prophet Samuel came, and the oil wouldn't flow until they went and got David. And David comes. He's anointed king. Man, the music is playing. It's on top of the world. He's going to be the next king in Israel's history. And in chapter 17, his daddy tells him to go down and check on his brothers. His brothers have gone down to fight. Israel finds himself in the valley of Elah. On one side is Israel. On the other side is their perennial enemies. And when they get there, Goliath of Gath is there, and the children of God won't fight. David is still listening to the music from being anointed king. He gets there, and his brother says to him, David, his brother Eliab says to him, "What are you doing down here? You can't fight. Go back home. You just here for some mess." The music stops. David doesn't quit dancing. David goes, and in chapter 17, verse 32, he goes to see King Saul. And King Saul says to David, "David, you can't fight." The music stops. But David doesn't go back home. David keeps dancing. And I think David gives us some lessons on how to keep dancing when your music stops. Look with me in chapter 17, verse 32. And David said to Saul, Saul said to David, thou art not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. When he rose up against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said unto David, go, and the Lord be with you. The grass withers and the flowers thereof fade away, but the word of our God shall stand forever. How to keep dancing when the music stops. God requires that we remain committed to our calling, even in challenging circumstances. I want to suggest that I think about 4 things, and I'll get to interview Emily later, but I want to suggest about 4 things will help you keep on dancing. Would you like to hear them? Yes. Now, because this is an order for a sermon and not a full one, if you help me, I'll be finished in just a little bit. Amen. The first thing I want to suggest that you need if you're going to keep dancing when the music stops is you need a proper estimation of your dance. You need to know. I would suggest that when Emily came to dance, she had a confidence because of the time she had spent in practice. She had confidence that she could do her part. And I want to suggest to you from the text that David would have us to understand that God expects for his people to have confidence in not just their creator, but confidence in their calling. Now, many of us in the church, we tend to run from confidence because we think confidence is arrogance, but that is not the case. I'm not talking about the kind of confidence that Dr. Bronson Way had to experience with a young Boy Scout. Dr. Bronson Way is a noted neurologist. He was walking with a group of people, and as he was walking, he saw a young man hit a tree who was on a scooter. Dr. Bronson sent someone for help, and while they were gone, he began to work on the young man. And about 5 minutes into him working on it, a young man came up and said, I'll take over from here. I'm a Boy Scout. I'm not saying that you are so confident that you're better than the doctor, but I'm saying that there is a line between when you know that God has called you, you ought to have the confidence to say, the one who created me and called me has equipped me to do the task. You act like you don't believe me. David comes up here and Saul says to David, you can't fight. And David says to him that I'm fighting for the Lord. The Lord has created me. And I think the time has come for believers to have confidence in the calling that you have. I'm often asked when I travel places, people say, aren't you nervous? Aren't you afraid? And let me be honest, I'm always nervous when I preach. I'm nervous on Wednesday morning, on Wednesday evening. I'm nervous on Sunday morning. When I stop being nervous, I'm going to stop preaching. But I do know something. Whenever I go to preach, I am not overly frightened because I know 2 things. I know I've been invited by the people who are there, and I've been called by God. So I walk in a confidence that says God has called me. You see, for too long we tend to forgotten that the Bible says we ought not think more highly of ourselves, but you ought to think highly, just not more highly. You're going to help me in a minute. You see, you got to understand that when God calls you to a task, he equips you. And what David said is, who I am is not dependent on who other folks say. I know what my brother Eliab said, but he didn't call me. I know what Saul said, but Saul didn't call me. And you've got to develop a confidence that the God who calls you has equipped you. Because what you've got to learn to do is you've got to learn to appreciate who you are. Because when you start to appreciate you, you'll operate as you, and eventually you will celebrate you. I ain't after nobody, but let me tell you, I'm long past the part of making myself feel small so that other folk will feel comfortable. I am the president and the CEO of the Delvin Atchison fan club. I like me some me. I live with me. I've known me all of my life, and I'm made in the image and the likeness of God. I ain't better than nobody else, but I don't have to take a back seat to anybody. When Emily was dancing, you could see she was confident. Why was she confident? Because she had spent some time in practice. She had worked on what she was supposed to do. When God calls you to something, when you give yourself to a task, when you commit yourself to the Lord, you know that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Other folk don't determine my self-worth. That's why it's called self-worth. Yeah, when you have a proper estimate, when you know that you have been called. Some of you remember when we used to have to recite in school. I don't know if they make people do this now, but we would have to recite. We'd have to memorize. You remember, we'd have to do that from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. One that a perilous shore, the suit, the drood of moth has pierced it to the... Somebody here know about the Canterbury Tales. You remember when we had to do that soliloquy in Hamlet, to be or not to be. That is the question, whether 'tis noble in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune or to take. You remember when we had to do that. Now, there are two things you know. Number one, you know if you hadn't done it, ain't nowhere in the world you were going to look at the teacher. We didn't have cell phones, but your shoe was going to be untied, your pencil dropped. But if you had spent some time practicing, if you had stayed up at night, if there was a particular girl or boy in the class you wanted to impress with, what shouldn't have... Come on, wink at me if I'm telling the truth. That when the teacher got ready to call somebody, you would look right at her. You would almost dare. You would almost say, call on me. That's what David says in the text. I spent some time. I've been practicing. I've been praying. And if won't nobody else go, I will go. You need a proper estimation of your dance. But not only did she have a proper estimation of her dance, but she had some previous encounters with difficulty. Wouldn't you agree that that wasn't the first time the music is messed up? I'd be willing to bet that wasn't the first time that she had to dance when her legs or ankle was sore. She wasn't feeling well. Here is what David says to us. David says to King Saul, you act like this is my first rodeo. I keep on dancing because I used to keep the sheep, and a lion and a bear came my way. And I need to suggest to you that one of the ways you keep on dancing, even when your music stops, is to understand that this ain't the first time the music has quit on you. Somebody ought to wink at me now. If I got anybody here who's never had a struggle, who's never had a problem, I need to know your secret, because the truth of the matter is that if you live, you're going to struggle. And you've got to have, David has this attitude that says, I'm getting ready to fight Goliath, but this ain't the first fight I've had. And every believer needs to develop a conviction that this is not your first time. This is not the only time. You have had some previous encounters with difficulty, and what God was doing for you is that God was training you in those times to be ready for this time. You act like you act like you don't believe me. I like what he says here in this text. He understands something, y'all. You remember when the disciples were on the boat with Jesus and Jesus was asleep? They went down and woke him up. That wasn't the only storm. The next time they got into a storm, Jesus was on the shore. So what Jesus says to us is, I know what you're going through right now, but you've got to understand, I'm getting you ready for something bigger, because with bigger tests comes bigger rewards. I don't need everybody. I just need somebody here who's been in school. If you ever been in school, you know when you were in elementary school that by the time you got to junior high, your tests were harder. And you should have learned in junior high that testing is the way you get promoted. What God says to us is that every time you've had a difficulty, I've prepared you. I would imagine that if that had been Emily's first dance when the music went off, she would have stopped and looked around. I know grown folk who are supposed to be professionals. I've gone to concerts where they had track, and the folk who were singing would stop and say, now get my music right. You see, when you've got encounters with difficulty, you know that the music ain't your thing. Your thing is to sing. Your thing, I'm killing me. I'm shouting by myself. Yeah. My thing is to dance, and I got to keep on dancing. It doesn't matter. And this ain't the first time that the music has messed up. I don't need everybody, but I need somebody with an understanding that says this is not the first time that I've had to be sick. It's not the first time that I've had to be broke. It's not the first time I've had to deal with some heartache. And see, you got to learn how to understand your problems. I was reading the other day that the Bureau of Statistics in Washington, D.C. said that that if you take the fall that would cover a 7-city block, 7 cities, at a depth of 100 feet, that all that fall could be condensed into 1 glass of water. Can I tell you something about your encounter? The enemy has a way of making your stuff seem big. But you got to learn when you're going through, this is just a smoke screen. Somebody ain't shouted with me yet. See, the disciplines of every storm prepares me for the next storm. The discipline of everything prepares me for the next one. And here's what you got to understand, y'all. If you're going to do what God wants you to do, David understood. Now, David understood that he had been anointed king. And David said, since I've been anointed king, I understand what my destiny is, and I can't get to my destiny without difficulty. David said, I can't be tripping because God put a giant in my way, because the giant is on my way to where I'm going. Can I tell you, when I was in undergrad, it wasn't nearly as tough as grad work. And when you get to doctoral level, it's a whole nother thing. But there's a different reward on the end. I don't need everybody, but I need about 7 people in here on this early service to help me testify that the reason my troubles are harder is because the reason my test is tougher is because my testimony is going to be greater. The reason my trial is harder is because my reward is going to be greater. The reason I'm working hard, anybody will tell you that it just takes a little bit more to get to the next level. You got to work a little bit harder. Every round goes a little bit higher. And I've got to understand that this is not my first time. Y'all, I tell you why I want to shout. Here it is. You got to have a proper estimation of your dance. You've had some previous encounters with difficulty, but David had some personal experience with deliverance. It's in the text. I know Sunday wasn't the first time Emily had finished a dance. I've been watching her dance since we've been at church. She understood that if you keep on dancing, you're going to make it to the end of your dance. Y'all didn't watch what David says. So Saul says to David, now let me tell you this about Saul. Be careful who you listen to, because Saul has lost his anointing. And it's hard to take advice from folk who don't follow God about how you ought to follow. He says this. He said, now you can't do it. And David said, wait a minute. I've been delivered before. The Lord who brought me not only from a lion, but from a bear. Watch what David says. David says, I was doing my dance, what I was called to do, watching the sheep, and a lion came and a bear. Now, here are 2 areas of difficulty. You know how the lion is. The lion is going to sneak up on you. The lion is going to get you. The lion goes for the sick. The lion goes for the one who's by himself. David said that the lion came to try to take a sheep, but I slew the lion. He said, but that ain't the only one I had. The lion was going to get me from the back, but the bear is so big, he just going to take over me. David said, God got my back and my front. And David said, I've been delivered before. I'm trying to shout here, but y'all ain't going to even shout with me. I need somebody to say that this ain't the first time, not only that I've been in trouble, but it ain't the first time the Lord has brought me out. I got some testimonies about how God has brought me out. I got some testimony about what God has done for me. I was reading a story about Ted Hansel, who was a pastor, and he said that he had gone rock climbing with his son, and they were climbing with his little boy. He said, and he was standing, and his little boy called him and said, hey, Daddy. And when he turned around, his boy jumped, and in his chest, and he said he fell to the ground and caught it. When his son did that, when he stood up, he said when he caught his breath, he looked at his son and said, now give me one good reason why you would jump off that cliff. Son said, because you're my daddy. You caught me before. I don't need everybody. I just need some folk who daddy done caught before. Who when you get sick, you can tell him, Lord, heal me now like you've done back then. I just need some folk who when you get broke to say, Lord, you make a way like you've done before. I need some folk when you get depressed to say, Lord, give me joy because I've seen you do it before. I need some folk when folks start talking about you, say, Lord, be a shield around me because you've done it before. This ain't my first time. It ain't the first time I've been in difficulty, but it sure ain't the first time I've been delivered. And I'm not talking about what I read. I'm not talking about what I heard. David said, I'm the one and the same God. When you invited me to become your interim, the people said to me, we need your resume. They asked for a bio. And what they wanted to do is to see what I've done, because based upon what I've done, there's an expectation of what I might do. Well, I need to tell you, just in case you don't know, and somebody here been looking for a daddy to catch you, let me give you God's resume. Tell me where you want me to start, because it's a big one. I tell you what, I'll cut out some stuff. Children of Israel will tell you in God's resume about deliverance that when we were on the Red Sea and there were mountains on both sides, Pharaoh was closing in. We didn't have an inner tube, but God made the east wind blow, and he made a highway just like that, and we walked over on dry ground. They'll tell you that when we got to Rephidim, we couldn't even have any water, and the same God who made the water dry up had Moses to touch a rock, and it turned into a water fountain. You ain't shouted on his resume yet. Ask Abraham. Abraham will tell you that my wife and I had been looking for a child. She was 90, I was 100, but God gave us an Isaac because God kept it. You ain't shouting. Daniel will tell you, I was in the lion's den. I was trapped. I couldn't fight, but the lions couldn't bite. God locked their jaws, and I used one for my pillow. I nestled up and got covered, and when I came out, the king gave us a... You ain't shouting with me yet. Paul and Silas will tell you that in the Philippian jail, we were locked up and beaten, but God made the jailhouse rock. Anybody here got a testimony that said, I got some stuff to put on God's resume? When I didn't have a friend, he was a friend. When I had no way, I've got some personal experience. Well, I would surmise she had a proper estimation of her dance, that she had some previous encounters with difficulty, that she had some personal experience with deliverance. But I want to suggest she had a powerful expectation of the divine. She kept on dancing because she just figured that after a while the music was going to pick back up. David said that the Lord, you could have ran up here and shouted. You could have gave me a high five. I wouldn't even got scared. Listen, David said that the Lord who did do it shall do it. Let me tell y'all what God will do. If you keep dancing, God will put somebody like the gifted Dr. Patrick Bradley. Now let me show you the providence of God. Normally Patrick is over here, and don't tell him I told y'all he'd be bothering me and work, but he don't know. But he went over to the piano, and when the music stopped, he started playing. Let me tell you what God will do. When you expect God to show up, God will put some people in your life that won't just start playing. They'll pick up your song in your key. Because when David fights Goliath, you need me to put some, when David fought Goliath, when he won, there were some women there who started singing and said that Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his 10. There's some group of folk who've been waiting on you to keep dancing. And what God will do for you, if you just keep on dancing, he'll start your music up again. You got to learn how to keep on dancing. Because what God will do is God will put somebody in your life. Anybody here know he will show up? If you keep on dancing, God will show up. I'm out of here when I tell you about the Jordan camp. Michael Jordan was probably the most photographed basketball player in the history of the game. I don't necessarily know if he was better than Dr. J, but we just got Jordan stuff on film.
That there was a man who was in Chicago in the United Center, and they asked a particular cameraman, how is it that you caught Jordan doing so much amazing stuff? He said, well, I did it for two reasons. There are two reasons why I did it. He said, number one, my job was to keep the camera on Michael Jordan. He said it didn't matter what Pippen did. It didn't matter what anybody else did. My job was to keep the camera on Michael Jordan. I knew if I kept the camera on Michael Jordan, that's what they told me to do, keep the camera on Michael Jordan. And then he said this. He said, I didn't know what he was going to do, but I knew he was going to do something. I'm out of here when I tell you, you ought to get you a Jesus cam. That it doesn't matter what happens to the music, you keep on dancing. And you keep your eyes on Jesus. Because I want you to know, I don't know what he's going to do, but I know he'll do something. I don't know how, but I know he's going to do it. I don't know when, but I know it. Is there anybody here that knows he will show up? Anybody here know he will make a way? So I'm going to dance. Thank you, Emily, for showing me how to keep dancing when the music stops.